the situation. Okay. The United Nations predicts that by 2030, that's 20 years from now, at a minimum, we will have had to invest worldwide $25 trillion in the energy infrastructure. I think that's very conservative, and you'll see why in a moment. 10 trillion of that will have to be in alternative energy, and I think that's very, very conservative. And once again, you'll see in a moment. I think it's going to be much more than 10 trillion, but I'll use the conservative estimate just to make sure. Okay. So I think it's not totally irresponsible or silly that Israel declares a national aim that they're going to capture 5% market share of alternative energy. We have the same kind of national aim for water technology. We don't have a national aim for IT, but I think we're doing pretty good there. So it's not entirely impossible. That represents, over the course of 20 years, $25 billion in exports a year. Entirely possible. Okay, I'm going to talk about some of the non-solutions. And what are the facts? Now, facts are a very dangerous thing. They can really screw up some really good ideas. Okay? So, I am not against nuclear. I'm not going to argue any of my case on the basis of environmentalism, what's good for the planet, save the planet. I'm just going to talk about energy. I am not against nuclear. There is more radioactivity from coal and coal ash than from nuclear reactors. Coal is radioactive. It's also toxic. And when we recycle it into cinder blocks, etc., it screws up the environment. It's much more poisonous than all the nuclear reactors put together. So why do I say it's a non-solution? Well, very simple. A worldwide shortage of master welders. What is a master welder? 10 years experience, perfect every time weld. In other words, I don't mind a nuclear reactor in my backyard, but I want the welding to be working. So all the accidents that happen are because, and I don't want it to be done by a retrained computer programmer or an unemployed legal secretary. I want it to be done by a master welder. 10 years experience, perfect every time. We're talking nuclear stuff, baby. That's hot stuff. Worldwide shortage of mining and civil engineers. Oh, how did that happen? Well, nobody was looking. Civil engineers especially live on 95% public expenditures. And when the West doesn't invest in its infrastructure, then people leave civil engineering or they don't study it. Mining engineers, the same thing, but for different reasons. We have to recognize that there is a cultural revolution going on in the world, and I'll be talking to the men in this audience. When a young man goes to university, he has two things on his mind. Only one of them is to get the certificate. The other thing you can imagine. Okay. So he's at a party, and a nice, beautiful girl walks up to him and says, "And what are you studying?" "Oh, I'm studying coal mining." Ew. Or, "I want to find a cure for AIDS." "Oh, that's so great." We cannot ignore the cultural revolution and what people actually want to study. You know, oh, there's an opportunity and people are going to go into a certain, no they're not. We're going to see this in almost every one of these areas. According to the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is the lobby for the nuclear energy industry, of the 20,000 nuclear workers in the United States, and I'll talk about the United States because that's where you do get accurate statistics. I mean, the Americans are very good at that. We're very good at giving other kinds of statistics in this country. 35% of the workforce is close to retirement age. 25% working in the nuclear industry are already past retirement age. No way? Believe me, wait. Half of the industry's employees are over 50 years old. Less than 8% are younger than 32. And nobody's studying nuclear engineering. They've closed half the faculties in America. The American Nuclear Society, which is the industry's professional organization, says that we must graduate 700 nuclear engineers yearly just to satisfy demand. Only 250 a year graduate. Okay. As a result of this, the cost of building nuclear installations has been increasing greatly. It's doubled and tripled in the last 5 years, to the point of being non-competitive with traditional sources and alternative energy sources. People always look at the operational end of it. They don't look at aggregate costs, like building the damn thing. Have you ever noticed that engineers are very good at mathematics but terrible at arithmetic? Have you ever seen a big project that hasn't been an overrun and gone past time? In my entire lifetime, I've never seen one.
Small as well.
Pardon?
Small as well.
Small, yeah, small, yeah. How about uranium? Uranium is a finite resource, folks. In 2007, a fellow by the name of Gerald Grandy, who was the president of Camco Corporation, which is the largest uranium producer in the United States, said he expected uranium demand to grow at 3% annually for the next decade. But he doesn't see the uranium industry ability to do that. The fact is that uranium supplies available today can barely enable us to maintain the current nuclear infrastructure, let alone build another 40 or 50. We get people, oh, we'll build another 100 nuclear reactors and we'll solve the problem. Okay, yeah. Who are you going to build it with? What are you going to build it with? I'm not going to do the welding. In short, electricity production will require an entire paradigm shift, which will consist of the decentralization of electricity production off the grid. The Edison grid, we're still using it. 100 years old, over 100 years old. Still using the Edison grid. The most inefficient way to produce electricity you could possibly conceive of. He did it on purpose, by the way. He's a very good businessman. He was a terrible manager, but he had a good business vision. Increased productivity, the smart grid, etc. And here, there's a tremendous opportunity for IT. I happen to think that the smart grid is almost impossible to do because guess what? Somebody figured it out. That to get the smart grid in America alone, you will have to write more lines of programming than have been written in the entire history of IT. Do you understand what I just said? That's just to make the smart grid in America.
So let's stop.
Yeah, good for us, and they'll never finish. It'll be like the Rome subway. Okay. And various alternative energy applications, which I will get to. Drill, baby, drill. I call this the mantra for morons. Okay. In 2009, questions after, okay? I promise I won't run away. Over 32,000 wells were drilled in the United States alone. By the end of 2010, over 40,000 will have been drilled. So where else should we be drilling? I have a few ideas. What? Yeah, right. Worldwide, we find 1 barrel of oil for every 4 we consume. That's the stage we're at now. About 75% of the world's current oil production is from fields that were discovered prior to 1970, way past their peaks and beginning to decline. When I say decline, 6, 7, 8% a year in decline. I'll give you some concrete examples shortly. The remaining 25% comes from fields that are now 10 to 15 years old. We haven't discovered many new fields. Guess what? Most of the oil has been discovered. And this is compounded by the increased domestic use of oil exporters. There are 14 major oil exporters. All but Norway are increasing their domestic production at a tremendous rate. You go to the Gulf states, you go to Russia, they're buying cars. Guess what? They're buying cars. And they say, wait a minute, why should we be exporting this crude when we can build our own refineries and upgrade it to plastics? 300,000 products being sold in the world market today are derived from oil. You're sitting on oil. I'm wearing oil. I'm seeing these glasses through oil. I'm looking at oil. This is all oil. Of the 20 million barrels a day that the United States consumes, 6 million barrels are for product. And they're saying, why should we sell this stuff, which is really actually, by the barrel, even at $100 a barrel, is cheaper than Coca-Cola, when we can upgrade it. So it's not peak oil, it's peak availability of oil. It's peak exports of oil. Does anybody know what the major oil exporter in the world was before World War II? What?
United States.
United States. That's what caused Pearl Harbor, by the way. The United States threw an oil boycott on Japan. That was the immediate cause. There was a few other things going on. Right? And within 3 or 4 years, the major oil importer. In another 10 years, Russia will still be pumping 10 million barrels a day. They are consuming 3.5 million barrels a day now. In 10 years, they will be consuming 7 million barrels a day. Iran is consuming 50% of the oil it consumes right now. And that's what this terribly managed government. Just imagine if they really overthrew this idiot and had really competent government and grew at a decent rate, how much more oil of their own would they consume? We're going to get back to the workforce again. 50% of the global workforce, listen to this, folks, is going to retire within the next 10 years. This is apropos this new gas find we just found, it's going to be a game changer. We just got thousands of underwater welders waiting in line to build that pipe from the Tamar to the coastline of Israel. They said it's going to take 4 years and $2 billion to do it. It's going to take more. Because an engineer made that estimate. Average age of the skilled workers is now over 50. In certain areas, there's already a 38% shortage of workers. And then you have the famous statement, the America and Canada have 10 Saudi Arabias in oil sands and oil shale. Right? Have you heard that one? That's a good one. See, this statement confuses resource with reserve and reserve with production. What's a resource? Well, a resource is water. There's no shortage of water in the world. 3/4 of the planet Earth is covered by water. So why are 2 billion people without water? Oh, they can't drink that water? So it's sweet waters that's a reserve. So to move the resource to the reserve takes what? Lots of money, lots of technology, and lots of time. And this explains, by the way, why the people who poo-poo the concept of peak oil, they say, yeah, in 1950, the Americans, experts said there were 30 billion barrels in reserves, and today they say there are 40 billion barrels, because they've moved resource to reserve. But there's a price to be paid. And this has to do with something called EROI. You've heard of ROI, R-O-I, return on investment. EROI is energy return on energy investing. So when Colonel Drake built his first oil well, it went down 70 feet. He was getting 15 to 30 barrels a day. It was costing 1 barrel equivalent of energy to produce 100 barrels of oil. Today, the world average is we get 10 barrels of oil for every 1 barrel of equivalent energy, and from the oil sands and from some of these tremendous rigs that we put out, like the one in Mexico that was so cute. Cost $350 million to build that damn thing.